With pitchers and catchers reporting to spring training this week, another MLB offseason will wind to a close. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Penn State Sports Night. I'm Destiny Sanchez alongside Logan Bourandas and Chris Lemmo. Tonight, we are going to be breaking down the winners and losers of the offseason and any more moves that organizations can make before the season begins. Many teams have made great trades and signings, while other teams did not. Which teams have improved their lineups for the upcoming season?
Well, I think that one team that we could talk about, and I think we haven't gone like a day in this offseason without talking about them, is the New York Mets. And now I think everyone, when Steve Cohen bought the Mets, thought that they were going to buy everyone. I was one of those people, but they haven't really done that. They signed one of the best catchers in baseball, but not one of the best catchers in this free agency in James McCann. And they also signed one of the better relievers in free agency in Trevor May. And probably the biggest move they made this offseason is they traded Ahmed Rosario and Andres Jimenez to the Indians for Francisco Lindor, one of the best shortstops in all of baseball, as well as Carlos Carrasco, who for maybe 1 or 2 years can be a good piece to that Mets rotation. Now, they didn't go out and get a Trevor Bauer, JT Realmuto, one of those guys, but they got minor pieces. And they also got some good bench pieces as well, where they got Jonathan Villar and they got Yordan Yamamoto from the Marlins in separate signings. As in the past, these Mets teams, they didn't have a lot of depth, but now those are pretty good depth pieces as well. And they signed Kevin Pillar as well to help out in the outfield. And the Mets, they kind of set themselves up in a good position for the future, as they now have some guys coming up under contract like Michael Conforto, Francisco Lindor, Noah Syndergaard. Now because they didn't sign Trevor Bauer or JT Realmuto to one of those big contracts, they now have the leverage to sign one of those guys before the offseason starts next year.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that the Mets had a great offseason, but for me, I'm going to head out west to San Diego. Their lineup was perfect last year. I mean, that's why, hence they were known as the Slam Diego Padres. But right now, they knew that they needed to add pitching. Their pitching core was kind of young. So what did they do? They went out and traded for former Cy Young winner Blake Snell. And of course, I mean, Tampa Bay probably should have hung on to him. I mean, it's rare that you get a homegrown guy like that turns out to be that good. But they're going to really do well with him in San Diego. And he's had some up and down years. You know, some years he posts a 4 ERA, and of course he had the Cy Young year. I think he'll stabilize a little bit more in Tampa Bay with more of a rotation around him, and he doesn't have to worry about the whole, bullpen opener closer thing that they had going on in Tampa. And then they also added Yu Darvish, and Yu Darvish I wasn't a big believer in. He had that year, the first year in Chicago, where he just walked everybody. I mean, that contract looked like a mistake right off the bat. And last year, he put it all together, a 2.01 ERA in Chicago, and he finished second behind Trevor Bauer in the Cy Young voting. So, I mean, he's just another great piece in that rotation. And then, of course, Joe Musgrove from Pittsburgh. And Joe Musgrove has kind of been one of those picks to click because he had the 10th best strikeout percentage there last season. He's got great stuff. I think he posted around a 3.8 ERA, but his expected ERA was around a 3.2. So he's the kind of guy that I really think is going to make the jump into becoming a number 2 or number 3, probably closer to number 3 starter in the rotation. But you pair him with Dinelson Lamet and Chris Paddock, they've got a really good rotation going forward for this team. And of course, the lineup is already set with Tatis and Machado, and then they added another infielder, the top international prospect, Ha-Seong Kim, and he posted 30 homers in the KBO last year, hit over 300, and it looks like he might get the start at second base, or at least a platoon there with Cronenworth, so they look set for this year. Maybe they won't compete with the Dodgers for first, but it's going to be close.
Now that we have discussed the winners of the offseason, we have to mention the organizations that didn't make the best moves. What teams may be having a rough season this year?
Well, if you're a fan of that 2016 World Series where the Chicago Cubs came back to win in 7 games against the Cleveland Indians, this wasn't the offseason for you. You had key pieces on that World Series team like John Lester and Kyle Schwarber. They both left to go to the Washington Nationals. And this entire offseason has pretty much been surrounded by trade rumors throughout many of those Cubs offensive bats. Chris Bryant, Anthony Rizzo, Javier Baez, Wilson Contreras, those guys have all been in trade rumors, and they were all big pieces in that World Series team. Chris Chris Bryant specifically has been in rumors of the New York Mets. Nothing really set in stone yet, but he's had those kind of rumors all season. And probably the big piece to that team that won the division last year for the Cubs was Yu Darvish, who finished in second place in the Cy Young voting. Like you said before, he got traded to the San Diego Padres for pennies on the dollar. It wasn't really much of a big trade. Yu Darvish was the best pitcher on that team, and now you're looking at a Cubs team that's looking like it's going to be in full rebuild with the potential to trade a lot of those guys at the trade deadline, and there doesn't really look to be too much hope for this 2016 World Series core, which was once thought to be a dynasty to really compete for any more World Series, but at least they got Jake Arrieta back, so there's something there.
Yeah, I would disagree with you on something there. I mean, Jake Arrieta's, I think, a little past his prime, but I would say that, to me, the most underachieving team this offseason has been the Red Sox. And I mean, the Benintendi trade, I think, was kind of the final straw there, if you look at that outfield. I mean, they really sold low on him. I mean, he had like a 100 batting average in 14 games last year. He was hurt. He didn't look himself. But if I'm the Red Sox, I mean, a guy that's 26 years old, why would you sell young on a guy that's cheap and young and has a track record of playing good? I mean, his 2017 and 19 were pretty good. I mean, he was slightly above average there. And his 2018 year, he posted, I think it was a 4.4 wins above replacement. So he can be a very good player, and they sold him for almost nothing. I mean, they got Franchi Cordero from Kansas City, who, sure, I mean, he's got some good pop, but he strikes out 35% of the time in his 95-game, MLB career. And they also got Josh Winkowski from the Mets, who, I mean, yeah, maybe he develops into a back end of the rotation starter, but even that's kind of in question. So they really sold a cheap young outfielder for nothing. And I mean, that's the end of the days now of JBJ, Jackie Bradley Jr., who's a free agent now, and Mookie Betts and Benintendi. I mean, it was just a couple seasons ago that they were an electric trio in the outfield, winning a World Series for the Red Sox. And I mean, the wheels have completely fallen off in Boston, and I think it's time for a full-sale, rebuild there. I think trading a guy like Benintendi tells me that they really don't have a way forward right now.
Although we are getting close to the start of the season, there are still a handful of notable names on the market. Where do you see some of those players ending up?
Well, I think one of the biggest trade commodities in the past couple days is Trevor Story. And I think a main reason why he's been brought up in these trade scenarios is because his running mate on the other side of the infield in Nolan Arenado, he was just traded for basically nothing to the St. Louis Cardinals. And this is a Rockies team that doesn't really know where they're kind of going. It looks like they're going in a rebuilding direction after trading Nolan Arenado. And with Trevor Story being a free agent next year, the Rockies don't really have much time to trade him now and get a lot of value for him. So you could look at a guy in Trevor Story who had a great season last year in the shortened season, and then in his last two full seasons before that, hit 35 home runs in both of those seasons. So he's one of the better shortstops in the league. And looking into this free agency class, he's probably the best shortstop free agent you can get outside of Francisco Lindor. You can make the argument on which one you want there. So there are a ton of teams that could maybe before the start of the season or at the trade deadline make a trade for a guy like Trevor Story. There are a lot of teams that could be interested in a guy like that. The Reds are looking for a shortstop. The Rangers just traded someone away. The Yankees could always use another bat or two. So there are a couple teams that could really go after a guy like Trevor Story and have their roster improve. But as for the Rockies, they're a team that could be another loser for the offseason as they look to rebuild there. And Trevor Story might be one of the first guys to go.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the Rockies were definitely on my short list of teams that lost the offseason. I would say that one of the biggest names that left right now is Trevor Rosenthal, and he was absolutely electric last year in San Diego. And what's crazy about him is in 2019, he was with Washington, and I mean, the guy had the control of some middle school baseball pitchers that I faced. I mean, he could not hit the broadside of a barn, walked everyone, got dropped by the Nationals, got dropped by the Tigers, comes back in Kansas City in 2020, looks really good, and is a great trade deadline candidate, and goes to San Diego. And he really rebuilt kind of his reputation. I mean, because that 2019 kind of demolished it, and 2020 he looks back to himself. So I think he'll be kind of a key piece to finish off a bullpen, and it sounds like there's been reports that the Mets might be interested in him there. Another player is Jackie Bradley Jr. He was asking earlier this offseason 3 years and possibly over $60 million. I don't think he'll get that. His offensive output just isn't quite there, especially for the guy on the wrong side of 30. So, I think those are two key guys to watch. In terms of the pitching market, though, it seems like the well is pretty much dried up. I know one name that I like is Taiwan Walker. He looked really good with the Blue Jays. But again, he's had some injury concerns before. So not too many guys left, a lot more of depth and complementary pieces rather than star pieces on the market.
I'm excited to get back into the baseball season and how these trades and signings are going to play out this year. That will do it for this edition of Penn State Sports Night. For Logan Bourandas and Chris Lemmo, I'm Destiny Sanchez, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for watching this edition of Penn State Sports Night. If you're a fan of our content, please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more clips. Also, follow us on Twitter at PSSN TV and on Instagram at PSU Sports Night to keep up with all the action. For all my colleagues, we are Penn State Sports Night.